Hello, everybody. It is 5 after the hour, so we will get started. Welcome. Everyone, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we know your name and where you're calling in from. For folks that would like closed captioning, please turn that setting on in your Zoom window. But yes, welcome everybody. Welcome to the first stop on AAPI Women Leads Naming Our Rage Tour, a teach-in on our intergenerational participatory action research project. I'm Emily, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Content and Communications Associate. And today I have the pleasure of being today's MC. So welcome, thank you. So before we get started, I wanted to read out some reminders and event guidelines so we can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to read these out, but this event will be recorded and shared with attendees. As I mentioned earlier, Zoom captioning is enabled, so please enable them if they are needed. If you have any technical difficulties, please message Vanessa Lee /API Women Lead for support, or API Women Lead support for support. For any questions you may have for our speakers, please share questions in the webinar question box at the top of your screen. We hope to get to them towards the end of the event. As always, our healing justice practitioner, Shellanne, is available for folks who may need support. So please message Shellanne for any healing justice needs. Any harassment will not be tolerated. To ensure the safety of our team, as well as community spaces, our AAPI Women Lead team reserves the right to remove any participants' comments that are disrespectful, rude, threatening, or pose any sort of disruption. And finally, please feel free to share accolades, clapping hand emojis, messages of support and gratitude for speakers, researchers, and each other in the comments. But great. Thank you so much for being here and being part of our teach-in on our research project. I know I am eager to hear from our amazing researchers on their projects and their findings on violence, resistance, healing, and power building in our Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. So for some of you who came in earlier, you saw our team doing it, but we always like to do it as a collective. So I'll now ask our healing practitioner, Shellanne, to lead us in a grounding. Hi, Shellanne.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this amazing event. I am so honored to be here today. But as we gather today, let's take a moment and let's just give ourselves some space to ground for this event, as well as with our community. Today's grounding, we're going to take a look at our anger and our rage just for a moment. So I want to welcome everyone as we gather today in solidarity. We're about to embark on a journey of understanding and transformation. Our speakers and wonderful presenters will shine a light on the issues faced by our communities, a reality that often can evoke deep emotions. So before we dive into our discussions and stories, I want to invite you all to join me in a moment of grounding. Let's take a moment to recognize and accept our anger and our rage that we may feel today and feel from what we will learn during this event. Let's understand that it's natural to experience a stir of emotions, rage, anger, sadness, when we confront unsettling truth. Give yourself permission to acknowledge these feelings. They are valid, but they are also very powerful. It's important for us to process those emotions because as we do, we also create space to feel love and joy as well. Now, please find a comfortable position. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and place your hand on your upper belly and the other on your heart. These are the places where we often store our anger and our rage. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you're very comfortable, or just lower your gaze. Let's take a slow, deep breath in through our nose. Allow our upper belly to expand under your hand. Feel your chest rise against your hands as you fill your lungs with air. Hold it for a moment. Now exhale gently through your mouth, letting your hands fall as the breath leaves with your body. With each breath, imagine sending healing energy to these areas, your belly and your heart, transforming tension into calm. As we continue to breathe deeply, focus on the hand that's resting on your belly. Imagine this hand pulling out our anger, holding on to the emotions. Look at your hands. Imagine that you can see anger in your palm. Now, I'm going to ask you go ahead to begin to clench your hands into a fist, feeling the power of your emotion on your grip. Hold this tension for a few seconds and slowly release, allowing your fingers to relax and the anger and the tension to flow out of your hand. I ask you to repeat this movement a few times in your own pace, tensing and relaxing, channeling and releasing the energy within. Go ahead and do it just a few more times. In the next hour and a half, I encourage you to remain mindful of your belly and your heart. Check in with these parts of your body regularly, for they can be storehouses of our rage and our anger. Give yourself the time, space, manage these feelings. This is a practice, not only for today, but I encourage you to practice it in your day-to-day and everyday life. As we learn and share today, remember that in learning, there is healing. It is okay and encourage to experience anger and rage. These emotions are testament to your compassion and your humanity, but let us be intentional about where we direct this energy. Our anger is powerful, and when we channel collectively and constructively, it can create lasting and positive change. I want to thank each one of you for being here. I want to remind everyone that I will be part of this audience. If you need space or someone to check in with, I will be around. Please check in together. Let us collectively change our rage and empowerment and transform them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shalan. Thank you for leading us in that grounding. I will now invite our Executive Director, Dr. Connie Won, to share a bit before we start our panel. To speak a little bit about Connie, Connie Won, PhD, is the Executive Director and co-founder of AAPI Women Lead. She's a co-editor for the anthology Abolition for the People with Colin Kaepernick and Christopher Petrella. Dr. Won has appeared on Democracy Now!, MSNBC, NPR, and a range of podcasts. She's a former NSF Fellow, UC Berkeley's Chancellor's Fellow, and more. Connie, take it away.
Hi, everyone. This is so amazing. Let me just start off by saying thank you, Shalan. That was brilliantly conveyed and articulated for everyone. So thank you for that. And I also want to take a quick moment to honor and thank Emily, who's our MC. Our team is an intergenerational team, and we're very excited about the way we get to work together. Emily is her is a senior content and communications associate at AAPI Women Lead. She's also a 2.5 generation Korean American born and raised in the Washington, D.C. metro area. She received her degree in transcultural studies and literature from AU, American University, where she studied multicultural neoliberalism, racial capitalism, and the importance of feminist praxis. She also eagerly awaits the day when the Korean Peninsula is no longer occupied by the United States. And she's also very excited for season 3 of the bear. So I want to just thank Emily for holding space and guiding us for the rest of the day. Thank you both, Shalane and Emily. And then a little bit about AAPI Women Lead. AAPI Women Lead is an organization that was founded with a mission to end violence against Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, women, girls, non-binary communities through community-driven research and education, collective study, and cultural narrative shifts. Our mission is also to bring healness and wellness and power building back into our communities and to center our communities' modalities. We are women, queer, disabled, and survivor-centered and led. Our work to end violence is always in community and solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Welcome everyone to AAPI Women Leads first stop on our Naming Our Rage and Building Our Power event. A little bit more about AAPI Women Lead. We were created to own our stories and to own our collective rage, as Shalane mentioned to all of everyone. It was also created to identify and highlight the multiple forms of violence against our communities, specifically the intersections of racial and gender violence, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and poverty. We extend that, we intervene and extend popular understandings of violence against our communities beyond hate and towards the complexities of violence. We are also created to center and reclaim the power of our communities, our traditional forms of healing and wellness, and to combine them with contemporary forms of healing and wellness. We were created to continue to build racial solidarity and political power with Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Our communities are from all walks of communities of color. We do this work for collective freedom and liberation. We were created to also inspire community-centered liberatory research, education, healing, and wellness. Since we've started, especially our work on community-centered research, education, healing, and wellness, other organizations and other groups have also begun to do more community-centered research, more community-centered education. They've also begun to do more community-centered healing and wellness. So for us, we were created to build collective power through our work together to continue to inspire, to do community-driven research, education, collective study, cultural narrative shifts, healing and wellness, all as ways to create a new world. Today, we're going to talk to you all specifically about one of our programs. We have a number of programs, but one of our greatest and exciting programs is our community-driven research program. Our community-driven research program does a couple of things. One is it does digital and in-person research. And in that sense, we do social media surveys, we do in-person data collection, we do story cards where our communities talk about the violence in our lives, we talk about the stories of resistance, we talk about our stories of reclamation. Another thing that we do is our intergenerational participatory action research. That is the main focus of today's webinar. Our IPAR cohorts are 2-year national and intergenerational comparative studies to conduct participatory action research around violence, healing, and resistance in Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities. In these studies and in this program, a couple of things happen. One is we have educational trainings. This year, our educational trainings were on gender-based violence, healing and wellness, and transformative justice. We partnered with experts and other community-based organizations to host these trainings. And then we also had a disability justice-centered curriculum, one that provided public access to university curriculum on research, data collection, and data analysis. That also meant that one of our partner universities provided, and that would be American University through Dr. Lily Wong, provided us free access to the university library. So our team had full-on access to all the things that universities would provide, but it was in our hands and for our use. We also were able, through fundraising efforts, able to compensate our researchers and our partner organizations. That compensation also included wellness, community access stipends, and gifts. One of the main reasons that we did this was because we also know that school, as you all know, is quite unaffordable. And what we wanted to do was usurp that and make it such that people get paid to learn how to do research. People get paid to have access to university curriculum. People get paid to have access to university libraries. And people get paid to conduct their research, story gather, and tell their stories. So our IPAR cohorts get to do all these things, and we get to do this with them and so much more. Before we begin, I want to share a little bit of gratitude. I want to definitely thank our brilliant staff. You've met a couple of them. You'll meet them again later. They helped to construct and develop this entire event together. I want to thank our volunteers, our community partners, our funders, our donors for making this work possible. We definitely want to thank you all for attending this and joining our event so that we can all reclaim our stories, name our rage, and build our collective power. We hosted this event particularly during Women's History Month. And on this day and on this month, we are commemorating the painful anniversaries and lives lost through the ongoing global pandemic. The My Lai Massacre, we are commemorating the My Lai Massacre, which took place on March 16, 1968. We are commemorating the Atlanta area spa shootings, which also was on March 16th in 2021. And we're commemorating the lives that continue to be taken and martyred by the wars that are funded and waged by the United States. And so now, given everything that we've contextualized, everything we've said about our organization and the interventions, the very deliberate interventions that our organization is making, and all this, the challenges and losses that our communities have been experiencing, our first IPAR cohort comes from the Asian Women's Shelter based in Northern California. They come from the Empowering Pacific Islander Communities based in Southern California. Our IPAR researchers come from ATASK, the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence based in Massachusetts. They come from American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic Violence, Domestic and Sexual Violence based in American Samoa. They come from the Hmong American Women's Association based in Wisconsin. And they come from Aina Momona from Hawaii. These are our researchers for this cohort. And then we also have our community research advisors. That would be myself from AAPI Women Lead, Dr. Catherine Nasal, who you'll talk to and hear from later. You'll also hear from Dr. Lily Wong, who is also our advisor. We also want to thank Dr. Valerie Francisco Manchavez and Puna Levinson, who is from APGBV, and also getting their doctorate in, I think, University of Hawaii, Manoa. Okay, so that's who was a part of this first year or first cohort. I want to welcome you all to their findings, their project, their rage, and their stories. I bring on Dr. Lily Wong and Dr. Catherine Nasal. Yay. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited that I get to moderate this panel. People in attendance, please feel free to share your hellos, your thoughts on everything that I've just said, because it was a whole, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes full. And I was trying to contain my rage and metabolize it. But let me first start off by saying thank you. Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Thank you, Dr. Lily. You all have been instrumental to this IPAR project. Let me tell the team a little bit about, or the attendees a little bit about our researchers, or our advisor and our senior research coordinator. Dr. Lily Wong is an associate director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University. At AU, she also serves as an associate professor of literature and critical race, gender, and cultural studies. Her research and political practice focus on the politics of affective labor mobilized in relation to trans-Pacific coalitional movements against state-sanctioned violence. There's a little bit more about her, and we'll leave that for you all to read in the chat. And then I want to welcome Dr. Catherine Nasal, who is a community-rooted researcher, educator, and organizer based in Oakland, California. Her scholarship and teaching centers on care and healing justice as it relates to racial capitalism and critical immigration studies. She's the senior research coordinator at AAPI Women Lead. We're so excited to have her, where she facilitates community-driven research with an intersectional focus on violence and healing for Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women, girls, and gender-expansive communities. Welcome. Okay, team. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first question I want to ask you all is what made you get involved with IPAR and AAPI Women Lead? And let's start off with Dr. Catherine.
Thank you, Dr. Connie, and thank you for inviting us for this panel. I think for me, I heard of AAPI Women Lead in the summer of 2018, right before graduate school. And I attended the organization's one of the very first programming events, which was their movement building series. And I think that folks are going from like across the Bay Area to do these workshops on violence and processing a past relationship that was harmful both emotionally and mentally for years. And there are people in my life who even called themselves radical and activists who dismissed the harm that I experienced because I was young or perhaps inexperienced in relationships. And I didn't have too many people to talk to about that harm. And I often felt angry and depressed and alone. And so AAPI Women Leads workshop, the interpersonal violence that we face is so connected to larger structures of violence, of war and state violence and displacement. So that workshop and AAPI Women Lead as a whole really helped me name the rage I was feeling for years and allowed me to connect that rage to larger structures of violence. So fast forward about 4 to 5 years later to 2022, I was finishing up my dissertation and I was starting to think about what do I want to do after I receive this doctoral degree? And I'm the first person in my family to receive a PhD. And so usually the path is you get your PhD and then you apply to all these tenure track faculty positions. But during my time in graduate school, a lot of my closest mentors who are all women of color became very sick because of the pressures and racial and gendered violence that they were facing in the university. And even for myself, I started to become ill due to the demands of having to publish and produce, not only during a unique, also the loss of my father who passed away during graduate school. And even through my tears, it's hard to talk about. And so, you know, bearing witness to a lot of harm and violence, I wanted to be a part of a path where we could create spaces outside of the institution where, you know, we can learn and tell our stories without, you know, having to experience what Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about in terms of premature. Learn and teach and educate and tell our stories while being radically cared for. And so when I saw that AAPI Women Lead was hiring for a senior research coordinator to lead IPAR, I saw it as an opportunity to, you know, create a different world. And I was first introduced to PAR, or participatory action research. And I know that a lot of participants in our webinar wanted to learn more about what PAR is. And so I actually learned about that through community organizing. There's like Dr. Robin Rodriguez and Dr. Valerie Francisco Menchavez, and learning about how PAR is really a political stance that stems from grassroots movement building in the Global South. It was a way for communities who were experiencing violence to be the researchers versus the researched. And I was really drawn to PAR because it was a different way of organizing people and hearing people's stories, where we're not only teaching community members how to, you know, do a survey or to facilitate an interview, giving community members the power to control the narratives about them. And so for me, I saw IPAR as this opportunity for Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, women, girls, and gender expansive people to be researchers of their own experiences, to heal in community by telling our stories, and to ultimately build power by shaping the stories that are told about us.
Thank you for sharing, Catherine. I don't think most of us know this story, which is why we wanted to make sure you spoke and shared all of this with us. Dr. Lily?
Thank you, Catherine. This is also the first time I've heard this too. So thank you so much for being vulnerable here. It's just such a pleasure. I just want to name how honored I feel to be able to share space with y'all and to learn and build with y'all for the past 2 years. I want to especially thank you, Connie, first for inviting me to join IPAR 2 years ago, and for Julia Delafonte for connecting us back then. 2 years ago was a moment when many of us were living and thinking through questions of state-sanctioned violence, right? Including the organized abandonment and massive loss of life during the ongoing COVID pandemic, the heightened militarization and policing we were and still are witnessing domestically and abroad, and of course, the rise in xenophobic and anti-immigrant violence, which included the Atlanta spa shootings in March of 2021. And it felt like a historical juncture that was both pivotal yet familiar. And I was really struggling to make sense of it, right? Especially when mainstream discourses, mainstream media around the violences of the time felt reductive at best and harmful and misleading at worst, right? And so I was really eager to find folks to join in collective study, just to try to make sense of things, to figure out what is happening around us. Can we have better analyses about how we're finding ourselves caught in these shifts in history? But also to experiment, right, with ideas and action in response to the changes in conditions. And so API Women Lead convened a space for us to do just that through IPAR. And of course, I jumped to the opportunity when Connie came knocking, participating first as a social justice fellow to support the researchers through their initial trainings, and then as an advisor when the researchers were building out their own projects in relation to each other. And since then, it's just been such a delight to just learn from you all. I feel so much more clarity in the world because of this opportunity to build with you all for the past 2 years. I'm going to hand it back to Connie.
I think I really appreciate both of your kind of personal political commitments and the inspirations that brought you to AAPI Women Lead, but also to your own work. So let me just honor that. I think the other question that I have, and you spoke to some of it, I do want to ask you all, why is an organization like ours, your work with us, something that's important to end violence against our communities? And then how do you see our communities building power as you talk about your own commitments and questions? I'll start off with Lily, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Got it.
Yes. Well, I guess first, what I think in kind of following up on what I was just talking about in terms of 2 years ago being a particular historical juncture, I think since then, what the IPAR researchers have shown us in their studies in and with community is that the violences we were experiencing 2 years ago, right, at the height of the pandemic, are actually not exceptional. Right, that that these are violences that are quite enduring and in fact, quite mundane, right? They're mundane structures of colonial and imperial violences that have remained across generations, be it the relationship between gender-based violence with that of militarized occupation and destruction of native land and climate, to the organized neglect, right, of survivors by the medical system, colonial linguistic structures, or systems of shame and silencing. These are all findings, right, that echo Dylan Rodriguez's question. What if the violences we're experiencing are not reducible to hate and is in fact a persistent, unexceptional part of the death-dealing violences of empire, right? So with this question in mind, we can see how the IPAR researchers are really making really urgent and necessary interventions. They are building tools in and through community to help us understand the earth-wrecking violences of settler colonialism in relation to the gendered and racialized violences our communities negotiate on the daily for generations. They're also creating community support networks, right, to combat organized neglect, holding space for inter and intra-community understanding and healing. They are translating, they are sharpening our analyses, and they're building our literacy for each other's struggles, which are necessarily different but tied. And I think AAPI Women's Lead's kind of audacious convening of these orgs together uniquely create that synergy, the different but tied synergy. So I'm going to hand it to Dr. Kat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lily. And I think, yes, I think Dr. Connie mentioned the word earth wrecking, and I think how does IPAR help us build power and kind of resist the earth wrecking forces that are very much anti-care and anti-life? I think for IPAR, it helps us reclaim research as a form of change and as a power building tool. It's a movement building tool. And often when we think about research, it's usually done in silos. It's done on an individual basis. It's connected to a larger university or institution. Is often seen as this person who has expertise because they have a PhD or they're co-signed by having multiple degrees, right? But I think IPAR helps us see research as a critical project. It's a colonial project, right? I mean, there's countless examples in which our communities and our stories have been exploited and extracted by researchers both in and out of the academy that are not from our communities and getting millions of dollars off of our stories. And the way historically, where there are anthropological exhibits of the Igorot people from the Philippines who were brought into the Bay Area in 1904, and they were displayed as quote unquote primitive or savage life. There's ways that our people and Black Indigenous bodies were used for scientific experiments and for the sake of science. And so IPAR serves as this critical intervention because we are flipping who is the researcher and how research can be done. Have always been producers of knowledge, whether it be through telenoa or talk story methods in Pacific Islander communities, or even the use of weaving and textiles in Hmong communities. And because of that, we center our communities as experts of our own worlds. And the way that we practice that in our sessions is that we were learning about decolonial PAR, we were learning about different methods like autoethnography and talk story, and really identifying the methods of knowledge production that have always been present in our communities. We hold the power of what narratives are told about us. And it's often used to counter the very colonial images of what AAPI, women, girls, and gender expansive people are. We're often seen as the docile servants to bodies that can be conquered and colonized. And instead, when we are the researchers, we get to say that we can share nuanced and complex histories of how we have survived war, how we experience joy, to the ways how we have always resisted repression in very ways. And then lastly, IPAR was research, but it was also a process and practice of building deep relationship and cross-racial solidarity, right? To resist these earth-wrecking forces that Dr. Lily was talking about. And we did this research not in silos, but we did it collaboratively. We came up with not only individual research questions, but collective research questions that we can answer together because we are all students of each other's struggles. And we know that in order to build power, we had to be fluid and histories of violence. And some of my favorite moments during our sessions is when we were talking about, shared themes around land justice in Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, and also appreciating the differences in our experiences, such as, the role of language, whether that's in American Samoa, or talking about the experiences of Vietnamese women in Massachusetts, right? And so I think identifying our disparate experiences is also building our power, solidarity, intercommunally across ANHPI communities, but also with other Black, Indigenous, immigrant communities of color.
I think this is so powerful, and I'm so excited that we're going on tour because there are going to be so many chances for us to expand around exactly what we're saying. I think what I'm going to do is just say thank you to Lily and Catherine for being such big parts of our research project. If there's time at the end of our, towards the end of our webinar, I have one more question specifically to you two. So if we can hold on tight and hopefully get to it later, I want to close out on and thank our advisor, thank our senior research coordinator, both brilliant doctors who've come and been a part of our community. I want to thank both of you. And then I want to send it back over to Emily to lead us onto our next panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Lily, Dr. Catherine. Got a little emotional at moments, but thank you so much for sharing your brilliance and all your hard work. We are so grateful to y'all. So now we will be transitioning into our second panel, in which we will hear from our researchers in a discussion moderated by Dr. Catherine. So I'm going to invite our researchers and Catherine to be spotlighted, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Emily. I am back. I hope folks can hear me and see me okay. I'm outside, and so I feel like Beyonce, like on tour with my concert band. But thank you, Emily, for transitioning us. Today we are joined by three of our researchers who will be sharing more about their experiences in our IPAR program, and we'll be hearing more about what they and their communities are enraged about and how they are building power. Once again, we welcome you all to share any comments, reactions, affirmations to our panelists in the chat. And so our speakers include Julie Au from Aina Mamona. Julie is the Director of Education, Research, and Outreach at Aina Mamona, a Native Hawaiian nonprofit dedicated to achieving environmental health and social justice for Native Hawaiians. Julie is Kanaka Maoli, and she is a mother, a partner, a daughter, a twin, a sister for all Indigenous people and their land. Our next speaker is Tammy Shong from Hawa. Tammy is the Executive Director for the Hmong American Women's Association, a grassroots gender justice and queer justice organization led by Hmong women and queer femme women in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Tammy has spent the last 15 years in community organizing and advocacy work in Milwaukee, addressing issues around gender-based violence, access to education, and literacy access for newly arrived refugee communities. And lastly, we have Min Yao Nguyen from ATASC. Min was born and grew up in Hanoi, Vietnam. She is a proud daughter of two Vietnamese working class parents, a BIPOC scholar, and an educator. Currently, she is a PhD candidate in the Department of Applied Linguistics at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, or UMass. She is a community researcher working closely with members of the Vietnamese diaspora in Boston and a compassionate educator. Let's give a hand for our speakers either in the chat. They're amazing. Thank you all for being here today and spending your afternoon with us. Our first question for you all is, given the name of the tour, naming our rage, building our power, I would love for you all to, name for our attendees 2 to 3 things that your communities are and that you would like our participants to know. And maybe we can start with Tammy, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. So there are a couple things. There are a couple of things that, not only through this research, but through our work and also through our collective work that we've been doing together that really comes to mind when I'm thinking about like the rage, right? And I think one of the first things that really comes up for me is still the invisibility of violence that women, girls, queer and trans people continue to face, right? And it's still really hard that for so many in community that they are still suffering in silence, that there's still a lot of community shame, right? That we have to convene in these ways in order to have these really important conversations, but that our communities actually don't recognize like forms of gender-based violence as violence, right? And it's even more enraging that, you know, back in just last year in 2023, that we still consistently hear young people, young homegirls, right, still be able to share and talk about how gender roles are still very much a part of like our belief around how we view homegirls and how we just view and value girls in general. So even in 2023, it is still really hard to hear young girls talk about the difference that community sees and values them, right? And so it's really hard to hear because I think that these same cultural beliefs are still the thing that is still very much alive and well today, that also is the cause of how women and girls continue to experience violence. And so those are some of the things that when we're thinking about like what makes us really angry, that is the piece that makes us really angry, right? Is that we're trying to shift culture, we're trying to shift and move community, but that in this moment and in this time, so many of our women and girls are still continuing to experience, and queer and trans people still continue to experience violence, but yet community doesn't see it as that.
Absolutely, Tammy. And I think that was something that a lot of the participants, even in the evaluation form or registration form, talked about, is that there are so many of us who have been angry, but it's highly invisibilized. And there's also no space to let out that anger, right? So thank you for sharing. Julie or Min, feel free to share.
Yeah, sure. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for having us. Today is really a great honor to be part of the space. I will thank you everyone for coming today. And thank you, Catherine, for the question. And before I get to let's say two things that our communities are really enraged about, I would like to begin with identifying what communities in plural sense means, who we are serving, who we are advocating, because that matters a lot, and it makes a lot of sense to what I'm going to say next. So I task we serve an advocate for multiple communities named Vietnamese diaspora in Boston, Massachusetts, the community of adult learners and speakers of English as a second language. Many of us are categorized, and I quote, limited English proficiency speaker. We serve the community of domestic survivors of domestic violence and the low-income communities. And these communities are all intersecting and underserved and under-reserved. So like I said, that makes a lot of sense. That's that definition. That clarification makes a lot of sense because it's very relevant to the issues that that pains us so much. And we want to name re-victimization. And what we mean by re-victimization is the continuation of abuse and violence in the home, and from that into the society. And in that continuation, linguistic has always been one part of it, one part of our sisters' reality on a daily basis. And by linguistic violence, we means more than the English proficiency. We means more than verbal harassment. But linguistic violence is a systemic issue. It is a practice of rewarding a certain group, but sanctioning others. It is a practice giving access to services to some certain groups, but denying that from others based on linguistic and social background. And it's a systemic issue that is intersects It's part of a larger structural violence, namely colonialism, imperialism, and the history of patriarchy and its intersects with other oppressive um, system, sexism, classism, racism. And what does all of that mean? Let me tell you stories very quickly. We are all about stories, right? So one of the sisters that we met in the project, she shared with us that her ex-husband, one of the weapons that worked very well for him to control her in the home was to prevent her prevent her from getting any education in English. So she migrated here. Her ex-husband sponsored her. He sent her to work. She worked in a Vietnamese speaking environment, and that's it. And she didn't have access to any information, any knowledge about her rights, about the type of protection, or knowledge about what was happening in her home for her. Now, she I supported her. She was able to move out. She was in shelter, and after her a couple of years in the shelter, in the DV shelter, she and her children were ready to start over. But in her navigation in society on a daily basis, she struggles with all kinds of discrimination. So one day she got a phone call from the Department of Children and Families about an allegation from her ex-husband, and she told us that the interpreter rejected her request to translate. So he didn't translate her clarifying questions. She was terrified. She didn't know what was happening. One thing she did know was the fear of losing her children. That's one story. And then COVID hit. COVID made everything complicated everything. We all know that. Our sister couldn't apply for employment benefits from the Department of Unemployment Assistance because no information was translated into her first language. And she lost her insurance, mass health insurance, a state insurance. Can you imagine how terrifying it could be to have two children without health insurance during COVID? Just because of the form and the information that she received was all of them was in English. So these are the stories that pain us and that we are enraged about, and we name them as linguistic violence and re-victimization. Thank you. I think I'm gonna pass it on to Julie.
Thank you, Min. Thank you for sharing the stories too. But you know, I think for Native Hawaiians, similarly to what Min and Tammy built on, is we've come to learn that the most hardened hearts are the colonized ones. And I think that's what enrages us the most is colonization and the ongoing impacts it has on our land, our bodies, our community. The research we did for this project really showed that our community, the Native Hawaiian community, has a very clear understanding that colonization is not just an isolated event. It is systemic, and it impacts and intersects with our lives and our ability to exist as Kanaka, as Native Hawaiians in our own home. That is enraging. But of course, we cannot talk about colonization and violence without acknowledgement of our land. Kanaka Maoli have a familial and ancestral relationship to our land, and this relationship is reciprocal. So that is to say that the violence done to our land is the same violence done to our people, to our bodies, to our communities. We feel every bomb, every bone unearthed for a new development project, we feel every drip of gasoline going into our aquifer, we feel every bit of flame that consumed Lahaina, we feel that destruction, that violence. And gender-based violence is no different. The violence that our land faces is also gender-based violence. Our great sovereign leader, Haunani K. Trask, I think she said it the best. They rape our land and they rape our people. And nothing enrages me more than that correlation, to see the violence that our land endures and to know that that is also what our people are enduring.
So Aina Mamona and, within our community at large, I think the Native Hawaiian push for sovereignty is really a push to end that violence. It's a resistance to colonialism. It's standing up for our land and also standing up for our community to say that, enough is enough. So I do think with that rage comes, has recently come with a drive to do better and to create change and justice.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Min. And I think a lot of the rage that I think you all touched upon is this colonial violence that shows up in very everyday, mundane ways, right? It's the invisibility of our violence. It's the fact that we can't talk about it, or we'll get, ostracized from our communities. It's the fact that people are experiencing linguistic violence and the mistranslation of our stories. And it's also the violence that happens in our land. And so I think a lot of those themes showed up throughout our IPAR project. And I think transitioning to the next question, we did a lot of trainings. We did the research process together. We shared our and so we're curious to hear how you and your organization were able to use these teachings and findings, whether it be, linguistic violence or the invisibility of our stories to land justice, how you're able to build these findings to build your community's power through community-driven research. And I'll open up the floor to anyone who wants to start. I'm also happy to choose someone. How about we start off with Julie, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. So at Aina Mamona, our primary work actually focuses on traditional land restoration. All of our current projects revolve around harnessing traditional ecological knowledge and ancestral wisdom to restore land and traditional food systems in order to increase self-sufficiency in the face of climate change, colonialism, and illegal occupation. Through the IPAR process, we learned how interconnected that work is with addressing and naming different forms of violence like gender-based violence. The land for us is our oldest ancestor. It's also inherently female. And the work that our organization does aims to stand up and protect our land from colonization. And I think before this project, we did not think of the work we did as standing up to gender-based violence, but it really is. Kanaka are so deeply connected to our land, and what happens to our land happens to us. So by looking back at the blueprints left for us by our ancestors with the goal of restoring land, we also have that potential to restore our community. And as our projects move forward, a goal we have is to increase community capacity. And I see, naming the different types of violence we face as people an integral part of that. Reminding our people that this fight for our autonomy over our land and resources also means fighting for our people. And we can't leave any of our people behind in that fight. So it really is a time to kind of decolonize our community while we decolonize our land.
So powerful. I'm really excited to learn more. And I love that connection of doing land justice projects, but also connecting it to, the interpersonal violence that's also showing up in these different communities, right? So thank you for building that connection for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie. HAWA, we are a gender-based violence organization in Milwaukee, largely serving Hmong women and girls and queer and trans people. And I think that there was so much that we learned in this process. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for us was that how we had convened these spaces to really have conversations, really allowed our community, really allowed women, young people, queer people to have these conversations. And for many of them, it was the first time. Now, we've been doing this work for the past 15 years. So if you can imagine, it has taken for folks who have known our working community, that even now, we are helping women and girls and queer folks to really break the silence, right? To really talk about the violence that they're experiencing, right? And so one of the things that we learned is how excited participants were and how much they didn't know that they needed this space and that they actually needed to talk about specifically violence, right? And so what that led to this push from a community of women. It really led folks to want to self-organize, right? And pushing Hawa to say, hey, look, like, we're in a place where we want to start talking about these things. And if community is not having these conversations, then we're going to have it. And I think that was really powerful, because I think that we were really careful in the way that we held space for community, because we knew that these were really, really hard things to hold. And then we also recognized that it was also us as Hmong women that were holding these spaces, right? As Hmong women that had experienced multiple forms of violence, that is holding space for other survivors in the space, right? And I think that in that space, it felt really powerful to kind of reclaim like our space and reclaim our power to really affirm with each other as Hmong women, as girls, as queer folks, like that this is actually happening and that it's actually not okay, right? And that community, like there are some things in community that that really needs to change, right? And so it's propelled our organization to be just like even more committed to continuing to hold space for community, for women that want to come together and have these conversations with each other. And I think that was one thing that we learned that was so incredibly powerful, that through these talk circles, that women and community was so inspired by that they themselves started self-organizing their own conversations. Like that's powerful, right? And if our theory of change as Hmong women, right, to break the silence is really to break shame, right? And that was something that, yeah, was just completely amazing. And, I'm still to this day, like still processing like, wow, how transformative, but how incredibly healing it is also for us to, and for me to experience that.
Yes, so beautiful. It's powerful and it's power building, right? Like the fact that community members were so moved by this research process that they were able to organize themselves and to not only transform themselves, but also larger cultures of patriarchy and silence. And so I think it's such a huge, huge win. Then how about you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'd like to focus on the keyword here, which is power, because it's so essential to the project. It's like it captures everything. The research project is about power, more precisely empowerment. And what we mean by power here, it's a lot of things, but one very key component to it is voice. And I really think a voice is essential to our understanding and definition of power. What do we mean? What do I mean by voice here? So in this research project, we are able to name the everyday reality type of violence as linguistic violence. It's so common, it happens every day. It's a reality, like I said, I have repeated that word, but so little has been written by us and with us, but mostly on us and about us. And we were able to name it as systemic issues, not something as neutral and neat as English proficiency, but some things that intersect with others, larger forms of violence. That's one thing. And my voice will also mean the practice of doing this research and placing community as this very central and including voice from the community. So it's really the community first and then the research. It's a practice. It's a process. It's a journey of getting so deep into the community and being driven by the community and acknowledging, celebrating, and utilizing our bilingual and bicultural resources and wealth, and celebrating our community wealth and capital, and recognize issues and the needs and struggles that we deal with on a daily basis. So this research is really our attempt to address the lack of data in research term or the absence of stories. So we do two things here. Firstly, we take back our narrative, like I said, that so little that has been said by us and with us, but mostly about us and on us. So we take it back. This is our story. Let's just tell you our story. And that, but also we kind of provide a counter narrative. And what we are countering here, we're countering the idea, maybe even something more established than an idea. Let me call it a mantra. Yeah, a mantra in research practice. And the mantra says that if there's no data, there's no need. And that informs policy making, that informs service providing. We counter that and we say, if there's no data, that's the data. That is really important, and we need to pay attention to the no's. We need to pay attention to the silence. We need to pay attention to the absences. So this is a way we really generate our power, and in terms of including voice, giving voice and voicing and taking back our voice. Thank you.
And I don't know if you can see in the Chapman, but there's so much. I love that. We need to pay attention to the silence, and the silence is data. The absence of our stories is data. So powerful. Our last question for you all is, we wanted to hear about you as people. You're not only leaders in your community, you're researchers, but throughout this process, what came up for you while you were gathering these stories, even your own, and how has it impacted how you understand research and how you understand community? And so maybe we can do Min, Julie, and then Tammy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Leslie. So I had a lot of emotions, ups and downs, very dynamic. But first of all, at the beginning, I was so excited and hopeful. I was really hopeful about this project, given its decolonial and community driven. I was hopeful for something that makes sense, something meaningful coming out of it for us, for our community, for people that are close to me. So at first it was very, very excited and hopeful. And then throughout, and the excitement continued throughout training sessions. We engaged in really critical, challenging, but very necessary conversations about research, about ethics, about positionality, about something beyond positionality, about violence, so that, and then overwhelmed when we did get into the community and listen, started to collect stories, overwhelmed by how massive things could be, but it's sometimes so little that has been done, and has been like documented. But at the same time, it was so empowering and inspirational experience for me. You know, I often tell people that I am very ready to get into a fight with anyone who would have the guts to say that we are the victims, because no, we are warriors, we are fighters for real, you know. So don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Like I during the data collection, I met with like women who pick asses in community, and it was so really inspiring. Yeah. So and again, this was a sense of pride. We're so proud. We was proud that we did something meaningful to our community, and we did it together. We did it through pandemic, and so many things that had happened that I don't think I even have time to name. You know, things have that's heartbreaking, but we did that together. So that's what it means by solidarity. And yeah, throughout the process, throughout 2 years, strong sense of solidarity, strong sense of care. I really, really appreciate it. So that feelings, and I told you have a lot, and impact. Okay, quickly, I wanted to. I've been reflecting a lot on my growth, thanks to this project, and I remember that um, one of the first books that we read. It is a book on indigenous methodology by the author Linda Y. Smith, and we had a really like in-depth conversation about at the very beginning what it means by research. And one thing stood out to me, I still remember until this day, and the author says that research is one of the dirtiest words in indigenous vocabulary. And that was the beginning for us to be able to have the courage and to have the mental and the psychological capacity to really look deeply into the history and see what research has done wrongly to our community. And we took it from that. We did it differently. We justified our community-driven research by making it become an activist work by all means is a social justice practice, when our research is grounded in and informed by and driven by our communities and done by our community members. So that, and for me, it is really powerful and impactful, because it informs and shapes my understanding of research as an endeavor of something both personal and communal. And it comes to the constant reflection and who I am, my positionality as a researcher, also as a community member, also a survivor. And you know what, as women of color, almost, if not all of us, are survivors of different forms of violence. We really think about it. Yeah, but I acknowledge what I do have the privilege, the bilingual and the bicultural understanding, and wealth and capital. But moving beyond that, and I think Dr. Connie was the person who really initiated this conversation with us about moving beyond positionality and getting into what is really important and meaningful for us, which is relationality, from indigenous perspective, which is knowledge or the ways of knowing. As the outcome of research, so if we are really talking about research here, it's not a product for our consumption or transaction, but it's really the matter, the practice of creating organic and genuine relationships with each other, with the world that we live in, and it makes so much more sense to me. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Min. Dr. Min, let me correct myself. Research is not a product for consumption. Beautiful. I want to pass it to Julie, and then I'm going to share some shout outs to some researchers from our IPAR cohort who also have joined us. Take it away.
Thank you. So yeah, Min, thank you for all of that. I think that, so powerful, and really throughout this project, it was so interesting to see how our individual experiences as researchers, but also the collective experiences of our community intersected, despite being, geologically or geographically and, diverse. So that was really an amazing part of this project as well. I have a brief background in research. When I was a graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, I worked as a graduate research assistant in the Hawaiian language department, focusing on research and translation. And I kind of had building off of the idea that research is the dirtiest word for Indigenous people. I had a really difficult time in that position, working for a National Science Foundation grant on water research, which is a very political issue here in Hawaii. But in that process, our goal as the Native Hawaiian researchers was to bring our oral histories to light, to share the stories of our community members, but also like historical legends and mo'olelo and traditions that we have. That was constantly met with, for lack of a better word, disgust. The traditionally trained scientific researchers took that as what they called myth. They didn't see it valuable. They didn't want to consider that for the research project. So going from something like that to something like this is huge. And I firmly believe that, PAR should be the standard for research. Community involvement, community-driven research should be what research is. So for this project, one of the things we did to kind of regain and harness our own power was to do what we call a decolonial literature review. So instead of looking at everything that's been written about us in terms of gender-based violence, I went out into the community and had talk story sessions with people in our community who have experienced gender-based violence, who have studied it through a decolonial lens, who can speak on this issue for our community. I met with quite a few mahu, which can be trans, queer, or non-binary people. And we had these talk story sessions that really tapped into our tradition of oral histories from our own community. Instead of reading what's been written about us, we kind of tried to create a new dialogue on what we have to say about ourselves. I did my best to go into those sessions with a calm, open mind, just there to listen and to learn. But so much of those conversations filled me with rage and anger and sadness to hear the experiences that people in our community are having that I feel like a lot of us were blind to within our own community ourselves. Recognizing the privilege that some of us have even within our own community as a colonized people. To know that violence is not just happening on the outside, but also internally, that it is so ingrained in our community, it has permeated into our own lives, was a huge wake-up call for me. And this process definitely changed how I understand our community, and in particular, what our fight for social and environmental justice needs to look like. I think we see a lot of people in our community waking up and realizing that, we need to stand for our land and we need to protect our resources. But the fight for our land and our resources also needs to be the fight for our people. And we don't get to separate ourselves from the land. And we don't get to resist colonization while perpetuating a colonized mentality of who belongs and who doesn't. So that was something I really learned through this process personally, and something I've carried with me. I've been so grateful for the opportunity to do this. One of the people I met with for the talk story sessions was a complete stranger to me, and is now someone I consider a really good friend. Someone I've learned from, and I'm grateful for that. I think my sister shared a quote with me from a woman named Colette Pichon Battle. But she said, keeping on as is and staying quiet is leaving people behind, and we don't get to pick when and where we fight for liberation. And I think that really captures what I learned from these talk story sessions, is this idea that so many of us stay quiet, so many of us just ignore gender-based violence because we think we haven't experienced it, we haven't correlated it, how it's happening to our land and also to us. And many of us have ingrained this colonized mindset of homophobia and transphobia, and that is also leaving people behind, and we don't have time for that anymore. We're at such a pivotal moment. The Native Hawaiian community is at a pivotal moment where we need to stand together, and we need to listen to each other, and we need to hear and uplift our stories, and we don't just get to leave people out of that. So I think that was like my biggest takeaway. for this research project.
Thank you, Julie. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of love in the chat for all of you. We don't get to resist colonization while perpetuating a colonizing mentality. So powerful. And I'm gonna get to the chat after we hear from Tammy, but I hope that this process was also going from a place that really just dismissed like indigenous knowledge production of like myths and storytelling and talk story as disgusting. And I'm hoping that this process was a way to really heal from that and also reclaim that this is actual knowledge, this is actual data, the myths and the stories that we pass down across our communities. And so thank you for your brain and knowing how to do research in different ways. And thank you so much for sharing. And so I'll pass it to Tammy, and I promise I hear you and I see all the chat messages. Keep it coming. We'll definitely get back to that after we hear from Tammy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Min, for your reflection, and Julie for your reflection too. I think some of the feelings that came up for me during this process was, I look at myself at the very beginning of this project and coming in and looking at research and just feeling like, gosh, research is just so like, folks come in, do their thing, and then they leave and we never hear, right? And then there's also this feeling of like, can we do it ourselves? We're not sure. There's sort of like that lack of confidence, right? To be able to like really see and value like our work and our stories as like research and data for us to fully like to better understand. But I can tell you that I think how it's, for me today and even for my organization, it's been a really empowering process. And I think it's been empowering in that, right, it's like the reclaiming of the fact that like, yes, we can do this work ourselves, right? And that we can decolonize the way in which we do research, right? But at the same time, just so much gratitude for the research team. So much gratitude for the learning from other researchers, because this process like really allowed us to do this work, but then to also do it together and then also learn with each other. And then on top of that, like deepen and expand, right? The connections of our work together. And I think that was really, really powerful. And I think the other feelings that comes up for me is that there is still so like, I just have so much hope for what is yet for what's to come for HAWA as an organization, that as we continue to hold space and we continue to listen and provide opportunities to share, that within our stories, a lot of us also have solutions, right? We have like solutions to a lot of these issues, right? And so I think that makes it really hopeful. And I'm just really so appreciative for this and for this project and for all of you who have been a part of this. Just so much gratitude and just feeling like as community folks, like we could really do this. And I think it's really going to transform the way that research is done.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tammy. I'm glad that this research process wasn't a transactional experience. Like in the nonprofit or academic world, you get a grant and you like do the work and then you get the data that you're to do a report, right? But it's really good to hear that this was a really relational process, that no one really is alone, that folks process. And I think that's also part of the intervention, right? Is that PAR is more than, having community members do the research, but it's also like, how do we take care of each other along the way? And so I'm really happy that you joined us, and it's an honor to have all of you be a part of this first cohort. And speaking of our cohort members, I wanted to shout out Judy from ASADSV, who was also one of our cohort members. Thank you also for joining us. I also wanted to acknowledge all the different voices in our virtual conference room. I think one panel or one participant shared I think about Julie's remarks around how this reminded them about their book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer and the way Indigenous knowledge is dismissed. A lot of love for community-driven research. And I think folks were wondering what the book was that Dr. Min mentioned. I think it's Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Tahuti Smith, an incredible foundational book for folks who are interested in decolonial research and community-rooted research. We don't get to resist colonization while perpetuating colonizing mentality. Yes, we'll also send out different resources for folks to learn more about our work. And thank you, Connie, for sharing the citation for Min's suggestion. And then yes, I'm trying to quickly read through all the different wonderful affirmations. I think there's lots of love for Min, Julie, and Tammy. And please keep the affirmations going. And I do see a question in the chat around, how has IPAR included disability stories and identity in the organizing process? That voice seems, and I think that's a really good segue and transition to talk about the overarching report. We had 6 different researchers, 6 partner organizations. 3 of them are here today. Actually, one of our researchers focused a lot on disability justice and what does it mean to be a Asian queer woman experiencing disability as a result of interpersonal violence. And so please stay tuned for the report, which goes more into the intersections of disability and violence within a global pandemic. And what does that mean also to be queer in that experience? And so we'll be releasing our report later in May. We just went through our first round of first drafts. And so just know that that question will be answered more fully when we release our report. And so with that, I know that we're coming to a close. I would love for all of us to share more affirmations, clap, Min, Julie, and Tammy, for not only sharing their stories here today, but also for their incredible research, the work that they do every day to end violence. And I just want to thank you all for just being wonderful people and for being able to share such it's even through Zoom, across the country. And so thank you, Min, Julie, and Tammy for your time. And so with that, I'll pass it. Emily.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much, everybody, for these reflections and stories. Yes, another virtual round of applause for the amazing team. Yeah, I know I'm just honored to hear more about the research and the experiences that our researchers had. And I think, yeah, in the Zoom call, there was so much shared, so much sadness and tragedy shared, but also so much collective strength. I think the community building across states, across oceans, might I say, similarly to what Julie said, like geographically different, but being able to connect through our particularized struggles, I think is the strength of this IPAR cohort for sure. So all your flowers, everybody. Audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We are coming to the end of our event, but stay with us because we got a few more things to go over before we close out. So I want to remind everyone that this is just the first stop on our Naming Our Rage, Building Our Power tour. We hope you can join us at our future tour stops, which are all listed on the slide. As you can see, we have 4 more dates planned out in Seattle, San Francisco, and Oakland, and more to come. And if you don't already, follow us on social media to hear more about all those events. So moving on to our next slide. Yes. Before we close out, we want to share 4 ways to stay involved with our work. First off, we are sharing our evaluation form. Please fill it out as we would love to hear from our audience and learn more about you and any of your thoughts on our event. Another way to stay involved is to donate to AAPI Women Lead to support future research and upcoming programs. You can visit imreadymovement.org/donate, which is also at the bottom of the slide. The third way to get involved is to stay engaged with us by joining our newsletter list, which you can also sign up for at imreadymovement.org. I will say, as the author of most of those newsletters, I would highly recommend signing up for them. We have the full IPAR report coming in May and a very exciting new initiative planned that we will be announcing, and we promise you don't want to miss it. So sign up for the newsletter and continue following us on social media. And lastly, save the date for our future events. We want to highlight 2 very important events, so put them down in your calendars. We're going to have a celebration on May 24th for Asian Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we are so excited to announce the date for our annual I'm Ready Movement Conference happening on September 21st, 2024. As some of you may know, I'm Ready is our biggest event every year where we gather to learn, to receive nourishment, and to be together in community. So we're really excited for this year's I'm Ready and to continue to name our sources of rage and build our power together in the fall. So that's the end of our slides. Finally, if we can end the screen share, I want to take this time to thank everyone involved in the production of this event. So that's the tech team. If the tech team could show everyone's faces, all the speakers, researchers, practitioners, partners, and the AAPI Women Lead team for a moment of gratitude. Hello, everybody. Hi, thank you. I'm not spotlighted anymore. This event has been weeks in the making and has taken hours and hours of work and coordination. And so we want to thank everyone for joining. We're sincerely so honored and proud to have launched such a wonderful first cohort of the project. We can't wait to continue this legacy in the future of this research program. So researchers, shout out, love y'all. That takes us to the end of our event. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're calling in from. Okay. Bye-bye.